Now, about the foundational ideas about the on which all the later development of human rights have taken place. You may ask, why is it necessary to discuss these foundational ideas? There is a very good example to illustrate why that is necessary. You, all of you know that a man convicted of murder uh, in a high court, uh, uh, who is now in the death row, was allowed by the courts to take oaths in the parliament, and the speaker allowed him to take oaths, and also when objections were taken by the opposition party members, the speaker declared that he will enjoy all the privileges of um, a member of parliament. Now, if you look at it purely from external point of view, everything seems to have been done correct. The courts have allowed him to go to parliament, and in the parliament, the speaker has allowed him to take oaths. Now, the impression that is created is that this is all okay. But we know that this is a morally appalling situation. By common sense and by normal feelings of people, they know that parliament should not be a place where a person who is convicted of murder should sit. Why? Because parliament is the place where, for the welfare of the people, best of discussions is supposed to take place, and the good laws has to be passed so that everybody can live uh, within a decent society. The idea of uh, developing a parliament is that uh, it will express not only the ideas but also the feelings, sentiments of a people about what they think is good, and will also condemn what they think is bad, thereby create the kind of environment within which certain acts are encouraged and certain things are discouraged. The very idea of a criminal punishment is not merely to punish the person, but to create an impression in the society that that kind of action should be condemned and nobody should do it. Now, this is called the deterrent effect. Deterrent effect means that if uh, somebody is seriously punished for a certain acts, it will act as an warning to others that if you do such an act, you will also be treated in that way. In other words, all societies have what they considered admirable and what they considered to be condemned. Society lives that way, as much as an individual lives that way. In our individual life, we have certain ideas we say we should do because that is good to do that, and certain things we should avoid because they are not good. Certain things we should never do because they are very bad. By being very bad, what we mean is it is harmful to others and harmful to us. Murder is an act which harms the society in a very big way. Not only because somebody had been killed, but also its moral norms have been very highly disturbed. Suppose everybody begins to think, well, I can kill somebody and that's okay, then the whole of the morale of the society goes down. So there are lots of profound thoughts behind the idea that of punishing murder. This does not mean that a man should not have a right to repent, has a right to correct his ways. That is his personal affair, and he should be encouraged to do that. So it's not a matter of revenge. When you punish a murderer or any serious criminal, that is not a matter of revenge. It is a matter of protecting the society and protecting people. So that is the kind of issue that came before the courts as well as in the parliament. By the man who is condemned to death going to the parliament and sitting there as one of the lawmakers of the country, publicly participating in that process, will it help the society's morale? So will the society be encouraged to think that we are a law-abiding society and we can trust the people who makes the laws? Now, that's a very important consideration. If anybody holds a public office, he should be able to win the confidence of the public. If anybody who is holding a very high position with social responsibilities is a person that people think is a criminal and should not be trusted, that whole process of lawmaking is come into a very serious doubts in the minds of the people. And those are very serious consequences. The people think that the lawmaking process, could be done by people whom they do not really respect, whom they do not think should really sit there to do this kind of thing. Then there is a very serious repercussions for the future. Now, what you see here is, formally speaking, externally speaking, as far as rules are concerned, there seems to be nothing wrong. Court has allowed the person to go to court, go to the parliament. Parliamentary speaker has allowed him to take oaths and to enjoy a parliamentarian. But on the other hand, this is a seriously disturbing factor for the society. Now, it is this conflict that the filing, not only in this case, this comes over and over again. For example, if a law is passed which allows accounts of a society. That is the budgets and what is the money in the treasury can be spent without accountability. Now that is a profoundly disturbing, profoundly destructive act for the society. And we know that all over the world is that kind of situations that has brought about very serious social disturbances. Because the money in the treasury is the money that is available for the people as a whole. It is like a family. The family wealth is not just the money of the person who is making that money, say the person who is working, but it is also belongings to the family, because family welfare will very much depend on proper handling of that money. Suppose somebody use it for drinking or gambling or for wasting it in any way he likes. The result is not only for him. The result is that the children may not be able to get a proper education. The younger children, small children may not be able to get a proper food, and therefore in the later life suffer from various kinds of illnesses. There will be mental disturbances within the household, which will have a serious impact on the life of the individuals concerned, as well as can lead to mental, psychological, and other problems. And when these things happen, their repercussions also is extended to the neighborhoods and the people whom they associate, that is in general to society. There are many that then the society will be a place where it is impossible to live. The same thing happens when it comes to the money in the treasury. Here the family is the entire nation. Entire nation's possibilities of welfare, possibilities of how the schools are run, hospitals are run, the roads are maintained, the thousands of other things that goes to make up our normal life has to find its resources from the taxes that people have paid and which are in the treasury. So the spending of the money in the treasury should be under a very strict regime of accountability. It is very essential for the welfare of the society. But suppose a law is passed which allows the existing government or particular executive to spend the money in the way he likes, and it cannot be challenged. He is not subjected to accountability. It is a profoundly disturbing problem for the society. But it can be formally correct. The person can say, well, the law allows me to do it. I have not done anything wrong because the law allows me to do it. Now, like in the case of the person who is accused of, who is found guilty of murder going to parliament, the issue of the treasury, all these, what it points out to is mere law by itself is not the source of legitimacy. You cannot just make a law and thereafter you can say, well, that is legal now, and therefore I can do it. There is an assumption that the law will conform to a higher moral principles that the people of that country consider very essential. So the law is, of course, is the supreme, but there is something more above that law, which is even more sacrosanct, and that is the fundamental moral principles which gives legitimacy to laws. Mere passing of the law by a lawmaking body gives formal legitimacy to a law. But what gives a genuine legitimacy to a law is that they conform to a higher moral order, where ultimately things that people admire and things that people think are the ideal state of things are reflected in some way in the law. When we make a law against murder, it reflects a very higher morale in the society that life is sacred. The life must be protected. So idea of the murder being a crime is not about the particular act of murder is being bad, but that right to life should be protected at all costs. So what we protect, the right we protect is the right to life, which is, for the society, highly admired, highly treasured virtue. So in order to defend that higher morale, we make a law that murder is forbidden. When somebody violates that, he violates that higher morale of the right to life. So what is important in all the, and we can give thousands of examples from recent times, where what is being done is formally correct, but morally completely wrong, and therefore is against the law, against the society. The law is to protect society. Law is not to demoralize the society. Law is not to, create a kind of distrust within the society. Law is not for the purpose of disintegrate society. The purpose of the law is to create the social environment within which society will hang together. Society feels, okay, this is my society, and I will do all my obligations because this society is good. I must preserve this society because it preserves me. You know, the same the tenet that was discussed within Buddhism. If you keep Dhamma, Dhamma will keep you. Dhamma at the time were these higher moral principles. If I keep the higher moral principles will protect me. So those are underlying principles of human existence. These are not things that are for any individual to decide, any government to decide. They are above the governments, above the state, because society exists on the basis of these things. So to come back to the last point, either the society must be unified constantly with a higher morale, or society will disintegrate first psychologically, morally, thereafter physically. If a society gets demoralized psychologically first, people see, what is this? This can't be right. And then he sees some more things. this is wrong. Then more and more, the level of expectations die. Level of expectations is a very essential dynamic of a society. It is what the people, when the people have high expectations, that people have a higher loyalty. Higher the expectation, higher the loyalty, higher the willingness to make sacrifices, higher the willingness to help another person, higher the willingness to share burdens, because ultimately they is a part of trying to defend the society, social morale, social ethos that they love. Love for a society is not a sentimental virtue. It's not something sentimental. You can say, I am born a Sri Lankan, therefore I must love Sri Lanka. That is true. In a sense, we love our land. But this is not the higher principle of patriotism or higher principle of loving one's country. Higher principle of loving our country is loving the inner arrangements by which we have arranged for ourselves a better way of existing together, a better way of achieving our common goals, better human relationships, better dependence on each other, better trust of each other. This is what we mean by when we say we love a society. That is why a lot of people who takes a lot of talk about loving their country, when the systems goes down, they will not stay in the country. Today, even for employment, people are looking for going outside because even employment cannot be found inside the country. Why? Because our inner arrangements. So, good governance is to protect our inner agreements, inner expectations, inner morale. So, that is why these three principles of human dignity, liberty, the equality, and justice, four principles, are so essential to a society. They are not some, you can, today you can do it and tomorrow you can discard it. The moment you do that, you do things that thoroughly disturbs that society. Thorough disturbances of society has consequences. So that is why we are studying this primary, fundamental, and foundational principles, because without that we cannot say whether a law is good or bad. When we look at the law or a situation that is created out of law as good or bad, we must be able to look at it from the foundational principles and ask, does it protect human dignity or does it go against that? Does it protect liberty or does it go against that? Does it protect equality or does it go against that? Will it preserve justice or will it go against that? If you ask these questions, then you can judge whether a particular law is correct and whether it should be allowed or not. The idea that before the laws are made, there should be time enough for people to discuss it is based on this idea that people have a right to give their mind and think is this law good for us or not? And I told you the way to judge whether it will be good for us or not. And that time is very essential so that people can make up their mind. This law is good for us. This law needs to change because it is not so good for us. This law should never be passed because it is very bad for us. This time, importance of time gaps between law being proposed and law being passed is based on these basic principles. It is not for just a fun, that like a game, you give time. It is to give the people a chance and say, express yourself and say, is this correct or is it wrong? Will it benefit me, benefit society, or will it merely benefit some other people who will want to make profit out of it? So if you look at it in this way, you will find this foundational principle we are discussing is at the end the most important things. When we look at it from externally, it looks like ideals. But in practical terms, these are practical terms, every small issue that we have to decide, we bring us very close to these foundational principles and whether they conform or not. So if you go back from the point of view of foundational principles into the issue that we started our discussion with, that is the issue of this Mr. Premalal Jayasekara going to the parliament and taking oaths. If you look at it from the point of view of human dignity, does it enhance human dignity? Somebody who is convicted of murder, whether he committed murder or not, we don't know, and it is not for us to judge. All that we can do is to go by the fact that there had been a fair trial, and at that fair trial, he had been convicted murder. Will it be enhancing the human dignity of the nation and the people who see that feel that, well, in our country, the human dignity is respected? Will it respect the liberties? Somebody's right to life has been taken away. And as a person who is accused of that is given the highest honor in the country for being a member of a parliament. Now, does it, of course, very clearly, it is against the very idea of a human liberty. Human liberty is enhance the right to live freely, fearlessly, and talk freely, talk fearlessly, and not to come to harm out of that. So, does it enhance equality? The man who has been killed has an equal right to live as much as the man who has murdered. So, his right to equal rights in a society to be protected. He had the right to be protected, and that the society has failed. And society, by punishing a person, in fact, is trying to rectify its own error, society's error. And if such a person goes and sits in a parliament, will the people have an idea that, well, my right to life will be equally defended by everybody, by the society, by the parliament? Of course, it comes to justice, is very clear. This is not I'm not particularly interested in this particular case. I'm merely trying to give you an example from the nearest, the closest to you, so that to understand the meaning of the foundational principles. Foundational principles have to be used every day to find out whether we are in the correct path, whether we are towards better society, or whether we are towards bad society. The consequence is this. Consequence is, are we walking towards degeneration or improvement? Societies can degenerate. If you know a little bit about the Asian countries around, there are some countries for another 50 years or 100 years, you'll find it very difficult to raise his heads back because of certain things that happen in their countries. There is a country called Cambodia. In 1975 to 1979, there was a government which called itself a socialist government, but by a man who led it is called Pol Pot. He took the country in 1975. By 1979, 1/7 of the country was dead. It was little over 7 million people at the time he took the country as the leader of his party, the Khmer Rouge. Middle of the 79, he was ousted by an external force, and by then, more than 1 million people were dead. Why? Within the society, and he could not control the consequences. These 1.5 million people were not all killed. Only about 25 or 30,000 people, or little more than that, were killed. All the rest died as a consequence of starvation. When a society takes the wrong path, it can easily lead one after the other into many consequences. It can cause severe economic disturbances, and these economic disturbances could bring the country either to various economic crises or for big problems like starvation, situations of mass starvation. These things are consequences. You take the 1978 constitution change, all the basic fundamentals of good constitutionalism. What are those principles that were shaken? First of all, the judiciary should have the right to judge whether a law is good or bad. Initially and any time. Now this is called the power of judicial review. Judicial review means when a law is proposed, a citizen goes to court and says this law is against the basic principles on which our society is based. For example, one of the basic principles is that our society is run by the rule of law. And the person says, by this law, the rule of law will be displaced. Now, the court examines that, giving chance to the government to give explanations, giving full chance to debate the whole issue. And then they make up their mind as to whether this is a correct law that does not infringe into the fundamental issues of that society, or does it infringe that? If it is infringed, they say this law cannot be passed. It is null and void. Now, suppose a law gets passed, and in the process of putting the law into practice, people begin to find that there are very serious wrongs that is happening because of that law. In a country where there is judicial power of judicial review, citizen can once again go to the court and say this law is bad. It's a bad law. Therefore, the law should be abolished. Yes, with the power of the judicial review, the courts have the power to do that if they are convinced that the law is bad. Now, what the 1978 Constitution did, following the 1972 Constitution, is that they removed the judicial power of the court. Judicial review power is what makes the Supreme Court the Supreme Court. Its supremacy lies in deciding what is a good law and what is a bad law. If you have bad laws, the courts have to administer bad laws, then the courts have nothing very much to do, because they must just implement whether the law is good or bad. Then it can become a very instrument of oppression, a very instrument of taking away the rights of people. A judicial review is very essential to a living society. Now, that was removed by the 78 Constitution. Now you see a difference of handling the same problem from India. India, you know, made its constitution in 1950. When the British left a constitution which was more or less like our 1948 Salisbury Constitution. It is a document which says broadly, this is how a government should be. What the Indian leaders, all leaders, not a particular party, first thing about constitution making is it should never be done by one party. Because the constitution is not about the future of a one party. Constitution is the future of the country. So therefore, all must be given an equal chance, and all must participate very genuinely, because they must set aside their political differences and say what is good for our country for the future. And in that process, the people should be thoroughly involved. There should be enough time for a very in-depth discussion. In India, what happened was, after the constitution, they formed a constitutional assembly, which consisted of all political parties and with the full openness to the society. They discussed the whole thing for 2 years. What their constitution should be, they discussed for 2 years fully with full freedom. And they were not partisan. They were not from the Congress party, which was the leading party. The man who was asked to be the the chief of the drafting committee was a person who had long, severe disagreements with Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, and big leaders. Because on the issue of minority rights, that is in India, it meant the rights of what is called the untouchables, the lowest layer of society, who doesn't have any rights. It is a man who represented that who was allowed to be the chief draftsman of the constitution. So they freely discussed what is good for our future of our country. And they came out with a constitution which has lasted up to now. 1950, now 2020, 70 years it has lasted. There have been amendments, but the amendments had not touched the core of the constitution. Now in 1972, around 1972, Indira Gandhi, who had a very huge majority in parliament, wanted to change the constitution by, in the Indian constitution, clause 368 is about amending laws. Now, she brought a law saying that when the legislature amends laws, judiciary has no right to inquire into that matter. It is purely an act of the supremacy of parliament, and the judiciary has no role. Now this matter was brought to before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, after listening to both sides for a considerable time, came out with this judgment where they said that in a constitution there are two parts. There are certain parts that can never be amended. And those are the core element, what makes the constitution essential a part. They call that basic structure doctrine. There is a basic structure in the constitution which cannot be amended. Then they said there are other things which are not the basic to the constitution. With the courts, the legislature can make any laws, and in that judiciary has no power to intervene. Those elements that will not hamper or distort the basic feature of the constitution. So they said the idea of the independence of judiciary, judicial review are essential part of the constitution. That cannot be amended. So that way, what happened in Sri Lanka was prevented by the Indian Supreme Court. In Sri Lanka, the judicial review was removed in 72, and up to date it has been removed. So the result is that the supreme power of the Supreme Court has been removed. It has been reduced only to do other things than to examine the correctness of laws. Only thing that is allowed is that before a law is passed, the Supreme Court can look into that and say whether it is conform to the Constitution. Now, the Constitution itself is wrong on some aspects. The court looking into whether this is this conforms to the Constitution is of no use, because Constitution, if it says the president is above the law, and the new law, some new law, reaffirms that, then what is the point of seeing whether his constitutionality is constitutionally correct? So by arranging the Constitution to go against the foundational norms that we discussed earlier, virtually laws which are illegal can be made into law. When you go to the Supreme Court at the bill stage, what the Supreme Court can say is, well, this does not violate the Constitution of the country. What should be looked into is not just whether it violates the Constitution of the country, but whether it goes against the fundamental principles around which society is based. Does it violate the rule of law principles? Does it violate the principles of democracy? Will it harm the democracy? The things that we agree should be the foundations of a society and a state. So virtually, we have got trapped in Sri Lanka in what is formally correct according to the law, but which are not legitimate from the point of view of a proper developed system of law. The law itself permits illegality. That's a tremendous problem when society is faced with that. If the law permits illegality, then where does the citizen go? Only thing is, for till a change is made into the constitution itself, that the fundamental norms of governance, which are universal in its nature, which recognizes the foundational principles that we talked about, are entrenched, and nothing in the constitution will violate that, then only the question of legality gets the meaning. So that's the kind of problem that we are faced with. What the Premalal Jayasekara case is pointing to is not just about his case, about a very grave contradiction that the country is caught up in, which has already led to lots of degeneration within the last 42 years, and which could even further lead further disintegration into society. So before we proceed further, I think it is good to, if you have any questions, we could discuss so that you will have a brief, relief from just listening to just one person. The best way to discuss, best way to do things is by discussion. So if you have any questions, you can directly or by sending an email raise those questions. And then we restart again. Before we go to the next point, for your reference, if you want to know more about the basic structure document that doctrine that I spoke about, if you go to the YouTube and just put Indian basic structure doctrine, you get some very good explanations about the relevant cases. Very, very well explained and very simply explained. There are serious, I mentioned only one case, but there were serious cases, series of cases that the Supreme Court came out and said that there is a limit to the power of the Parliament in making laws. And that is, they are subjected to judicial review. And the essential elements of a constitution is not subjected to parliamentary, parliamentary legislation, which is the very opposite of the situation that exists in the country. In Sri Lanka, anything can be made into a law and thereafter is legal, although it can be completely contrary to the interest of the people. And this will be very important for all of you, because you are entering into a period where there is a discussion about a change of the constitution. So therefore, learning how how the matter should be looked into is very will be very useful you to participate in that discussion. So we will go into the next point. Now, how do we evaluate whether there is equality being recognized in the Constitution? In this, let's again look from begin more from a practical point of view, and then go into the principles. Now, let us say the question of gender. How much of the equality of women is recognized within the Constitution and within our laws, not only Constitution, within our laws, and the arrangements are being made in order to enable greater women's participation. I think that word should not have been greater, but equal, not just greater. Greater can be from little better than what it is now. That is not the idea, but equal participation in affairs of life, not only in politics, but in the affairs of life, and for treatment of a person with human dignity, equal human dignity, like others. Now, how does the law deal with this issue? Now, that is how do we judge whether the existing law is adequate for that purpose or not? Now, when you discuss that, you will find the things that enhances the rights of women as women is not only in the area of direct women's rights, but in the area of overall social arrangements. Now, in a difference between a developed country and the country like ours, from the point of view of security of women to participate in life, is that their right of movement anytime without fear. You get many countries today where the women, including younger women, go about their business either of employment and more in the evenings for their education. Many of the educational institutes provide their classes in the evenings so that the working people, men and women, can also participate in these educational courses and get themselves qualified while they work. So it means sometimes you have to, home at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or even later. Some people with the groups of their friends sit together and do their reading or in their tutorials and various things in the evenings. At the same time, friends among themselves go for a dinner or any matter, and then they can come quite late at night. Why could they do that? Because they are fully aware that a security system is at work. The security system organized through the police is watching the situation and with even a slightest kind of provocation, if there is anything, the police can be contacted within a very short time. They will be in the place to protect the person. And by any chance something wrong happens, immediately the law will take effect, and then the culprit will be brought to, uh, uh, arrested and brought to courts and subjected to a fair trial as soon as possible. And if he has in fact done the wrong, he will be punished within a very short time. Now, all these are security arrangements. Security arrangement does not mean that every corner that there will be a policeman waiting or a security guard waiting, or you have to go with your, some elder person that you are going around. None of these happen. Like males, girls also, they do their own business. They come out at any time. Because of this security arrangements which are inbuilt into the social institution. Now that is an important part. The well-functioning policing system is an essential part of defending the rights of women, even more than others. Because if you want to enhance their freedom to participate in whatever they want to participate in, there should be the possibility that they do not suffer from a fear of being attacked. And this can only be done through a proper working policing system. Now, one of the Sri Lanka's major problems is the policing system of the country. Going into detail into this is not this occasion, but we have done it often, and there is enough literature on this, that even initially, in the beginning, a good system was not fully established. But till about the 1960s, there was a relatively a good system. Not a normal system as good as in the more developed countries now. But at least relatively a good system existed till around 1960s. The reason was that the internal arrangements within the police had ensured a high degree of command responsibility, by which anybody who engages in something wrong could be brought to inquiries, and they may lose their job. And the same principles that we discussed regarding the Premalal case apply here also. Deterrence is not just a principle that applies to citizens. It is also principles that apply to all state officers. They must feel that if they do the wrong thing, they will necessarily be punished. And therefore, in order to safeguard their jobs, safeguard their pensions, safeguard their status in society, they become careful not to do wrong things. Now, somehow, after 1960s, particularly after 1970, the new constitution, this situation has changed dramatically. Today, virtually, one time we had a survey, And we pose a question to a number of women. If you have some trouble, will you go to the police station to complain? To our surprise, 100% of the replies were, no, it is better not to go. By going to the police station, we can get into more trouble than relief we may get. So therefore, only I think not from Sri Lanka, but some other country, only one person replies, well, in my case, I don't mind going there because my husband is a higher up policeman and therefore I have protection. But the average citizen do not have such connections, which means that if you don't have connections, you don't have protection. Human rights ideas are based on an overall understanding of the notion of protection. This is not only for the rights of women, but the rights of everybody. The basic idea of the right of protection is that the state have a right to duty to protect all the citizens from any harm that comes by way of illegal acts. Now we know that people can come to harm in many other ways. We can get ill, we can have an accident. So harm is not only possible due to illegal acts, but it can happen in a natural way. The state is not able to prevent such natural events. But the state is supposed to protect people from the normal course of life, things that happen against the law. They should not be harassed. They should not fear that they will be harassed. That if they go for an exam or job, they should know that the fact of gender will not affect this. If I have similar qualifications, I will get the similar the position. It's a matter of merit, not based without discriminatory grounds. Now those are things that the state can and should do, and it is expected to do. So when in the past, one of the presidents declared that people should look after their own security, he was violating one of the most fundamental reasons for the existence of a state. State primarily exists for the protection of the people. Now here the protection does not merely means protection from external aggression or protection from extraordinary circumstances like terrorism. That is called national security law. But much more important than the natural security law is the security of persons, security of individuals as individuals. This discussion is virtually absent in Sri Lanka. There may be some good reasons for that. One is that we were a colony for a long time. During the time of a colony, the idea of security often is related to how to get rid of the colonizer. So it's based most on territory. Our territory is under the occupation of somebody who has no legitimate right to be the occupier of our country. So therefore, we should get rid of the situation. So the territory preoccupies the mind of people. This can also happen when there is conflicts regarding territory in terms of separation, demands for separation, and things like that. But unfortunate consequence of this is the main issue of protection gets forgotten. Main issue of protection is the protection of the individual. It's a very large concept, and it is without that a society there cannot be equality. It does not go only to harassments. It goes into other areas. The areas of right to a job, right to a fair wage. Fair wage is a human rights issue. Somehow, that is not part of Sri Lankan discussion on human rights. People in order to live, particularly in the present world, which is very unlike to the world before, like a village-based agricultural society. People did not have to basically depend on wages. They could live by exchange of services. Somebody does a particular type of thing and shares the products of that with others, and others also do the same way. The price-based valuation did not exist in the major way. It exists. It has always existed in some way, but it was not the major criteria. Demand and supply, and therefore on that basis, this is basically a criteria of the modern society. Today, people need their wages to live. Not getting a wage, that is basically being unemployed, or getting a wage that is not parallel to the kind of work that the person does. All that goes into livelihood issues. If a worker gets a wage and that wage is not enough for him to sustain himself and also his family, then you have the problems of curtailing a lot of basics that family is entitled to because of the low wage. Children may not be able to go to school or to go to a good school. Children may not be able to have the clothes necessary to go to a school. It may not be able to to provide children the kind of respectability that they could win within the school, because their appearance betray big poverty. The same thing, more than anybody else who suffers in this area, are the mothers, who has to make ends meet in order to provide food. In every society, providing of food is the thing on which the lives run. If you are affluent, this question doesn't even arise because it looks after itself. You have enough wages, and the wages will look after the fact that you will have the necessary things and necessary food. But if your wages are low, then it is the mothers who have to struggle to see how to use that minimum incomes in order to be able to provide for their families basic food and medicine and basics. And the state is not created for the purpose of creating these problems. The state is created for the purpose of solving these problems. If the actions of the state creates low wages, or in the case of unemployment, no wages, then there is a serious violation of the duties of the state. Now, there are many ways by which, as you know, by which the wages can be reduced. Not by saying that if you got 100 rupees, making it 90, but making the value of the rupee, value of that 100 rupees into a value of 80 or 50 or 20. It is not the amount of cash that is in your hand that has got reduced. It is your purchasing power with that to buy the basics. So the state is supposed to maintain the value of money in a way that it will not bring down the real wages of the people. Every act that goes to destroy the real wages of the poor is a fundamentally a crime. It is an indirect way of depriving people of many things, including sometimes their lives. We know that in particularly in the peasant areas, but not only peasant areas, people commit suicide when they simply cannot cope up with their debt, or when they cannot provide for their children. Now, if you read into a lot of communications that are coming today because of this social media, you'll find when you go into the countryside, there are people whose houses, when you see, is simply shocking. The kind of tale they tell about, looking after a sick person in the house, an old person in the house. They are all shows shockingly shocking inadequacies of right of protection of people, the poor, and of course, when the poor suffers, the most of the suffering goes to women and to children. Now, the way to judge equality is this. It is not merely whether number of people going to the university may have increased, which is of course a very good thing, but whether the quality of education in the university has improved. And one is related to the other. If the qualities of the education has gone down, the mere fact that more people are qualified does not give them opportunities to be employed or to be better employed, and even if they are employed, to be able to carry out their duties. So when we talk about equality in the from the point of view of the average citizen, we are talking about thousands of problems. And that is the framework of mind that should be developed within the human rights movement, is to be able to link all these problems to the fundamental ideas of human rights. And the most fundamental idea following from the foundational ideas is the idea of protection. The state has a duty to protect. It is sad to see that hardly anybody, whether politicians or social activists or intellectuals or anybody, raising the issue of the duty to protect, except from a territorial point of view. But the quality of life for a point of view, that whole discussion is virtually absent in the Sri Lankan context. And I'm merely mentioning it in a short way so that you can able to think these things out, because the idea of this educational session is not to tell you everything, because that will take a very long time, but to give an orientation for thinking. See, learning is not just knowing. Learning about human rights is how to use human rights as a tool of thinking. How to use the idea of equality in order to critique the life around you. Life within the family, life about the whole idea of wages, whole idea of quality of education, whole idea of protection, day-to-day protection, these things are all part of the meaningful human rights work. Whatever you do in order to improve these things are human rights work. Suppose you work towards a police reform, reforming the system. Not that you can personally reform the police system. That is not an individual's possibility. But you participate in the discussion. You are able to write something about it, think something about it, use the social media about it. Or when somebody is treated unjustly, you support that person. See, a person is go to the police station to make a complaint or something, that complaint is not taken, or if he's harassed. If one person is treated in one way, another person is treated in another way. If you contribute to thinking about this matter, and if you want to do that, today the opportunities are simply far beyond imagination. You don't have to have huge movements, huge things to help with this. Today you get the communication media, and from your own home, you can express your views about various things. There are people who are doing that in a very big way in many other countries, and Sri Lanka also few people are beginning. To use the social media in a responsible way. What we see in the use of most social media is irresponsible use of the media without giving proper correct information, and using it for ridiculing people and have a cheap joke. But this is a waste of huge resource. Any of you can write what you see. If you see that somebody was not treated in the way he should be treated, it is possible in a decent way, while observing the etiquettes of writing, not necessarily mentioning names, but writing the incident through the social media. And above all, now there's another method, the method that we are using now. If I were to be talking to you earlier days, I have to travel and you have to travel, and we have to fix particular times and all that kind of thing, a lot of inconveniences to spend few short time to discuss with each other. Now we can do it as we sit at home. And this is because the communication media has changed so much that it is possible without causing any cost. It doesn't cost us anything to spend this time and to be in communication with you because the communication system has provided opportunities for that. This is like living those days in the village. If you live in the village, you don't need any formal arrangement to talk to people. You meet them daily. Each person meets everyone else daily. And if you have some problem, you talk to them. And if they have a problem, they talk to you. And in that way, talking is more than 50% problem solving. People think it is the elections that change society. Electing of governments, these are things that change societies. In fact, it is the conversation that change societies. If people are discussing things, things begin to happen. Sometimes in a small way, but gradually in a bigger way. Society does not converse with each other. It's not a developed society. Of course, lack of conversation in the past, particularly in the recent times, had mostly been due to other factors like people have to go to work all the time. Their time of leisure is very limited. And even the little time you have many other things to do. But today, in the communication change, it has given a big space to have informal discussions. Now, this is also an informal discussion. They are just talking ideas with each other. These opportunities are very many, and if you use that in order to help in solving small problems. If a young girl cannot go to school because she cannot get enough clothes, so that's a matter. With a little conversation, people will solve. You know, there was a famous social activist who had a very huge success. When he was young, he worked in Sri Lanka, but he's a Dutch man. When he went to back into Holland, his reputation has spread. That he has done so many good things and build movements and help people. So younger people came to him to ask, how do you do this? How were you able to influence so many people to do good things? He just smiled and said, I did nothing very special. All I did was I listened to the people. And the people told me about various problems. And when I thought about it, and when I knew that the problem is a real one, that what he's telling me was in fact truth, I went and told it to other people. And very soon we found a solution to the problem. One example was somewhere in Mutwal, in Colombo, a certain slum area, people did not have at that time uh, running water, taps, in order even to take a bath outside. The people usually in slum areas, they don't have taps inside the houses and things like that. It is on the road you get these taps. And that is where they do everything. They wash their things. At the same time, they bathe, all under these taps. Now, in this particular place, there was no such tap. So this problem was told to the person that I am talking about. He thought over that. And he started telling everybody whom he met, do you know that such and such an area? In that area, people did not have, even a tap for women to bathe and things like that. And he said within a few days, one person who was a little better off than others, who had some money, he came and he told him, how much does it cost to put up that tap? So they said it is, he found out the amount and he told him this amount. It's not a big amount. And this man immediately gave the money and said, please go and give this, get this tap done. So they built the tap. And that changed not only the having the tap, but it also changed the mood of the people. Because one of the things that inconvenience them has been removed. So problem solving through conversations is something like that. You don't have to build NGOs, you don't have to build huge movements and things like that to achieve the kind of things that I am talking. Of course, there are bigger problems of equality that has to be solved politically. For example, if there is to be more money for the universities so that the quality of education has to be improved, that's a political decision. And that could be done only by politically motivating some people taking political decisions. But many of the other problems are not huge political problems. They can be solved within the community. What has been missing in recent years after the village communities broke down is the deterioration of the conversation among people. The people now have to move for their jobs and various things, the things that we talked about earlier. As such, stopping to talk with each other, about their problems and the ways to help them, the space became less. But today, once again, the space is being granted back to us. That space that has been granted back to us is through this communication change. With this, we can get back to the old ways without having the older kind of society. While we live our normal modern lives, we can do the things that have been done in the past when people were more closer to each other. So all these problems that we are talking about, equality, are not some abstractions that, just for the sake of knowing we talk about. These are things you can put into practical effect. Say the whole issue, let us take now, we talk a little bit on the issue of women. Let us take equally into the issue of children. Now, you know that in the last about 10 days back, there was a news item in the Daily Mirror the child sex abuse is in the has been in the increase in the last decade. They gave figures from 2011 to 2019. Each year, you find the number of cases have increased. Not increased in one or two, but by thousands. Now this really indicate not just about some people are sexually more bad, but certain social changes and also the protection of the children that was provided by the community is something has gone wrong. Now, if atmosphere is created where the people talk about these things, they thereby educate themselves, deal with this problem. For example, this report itself, if you know that, and when you are talking about a mother who has young children, talk to them, there is a thing like this. And, these are the precautions you should take in order to avoid this happening to your children. And, if there are people in the temples, Buddhist temples or churches and, other places, in their weekly gatherings, these are places where there are weekly gatherings. People talk about it openly and say this kind of thing is happening, and this is how you counteract that. If a child who has been mistreated that way, how do you notice the change of behavior? And how do you build confidence with the child to know what is going on and thereafter take precautions to make sure that the child is protected? While it is very unlikely in the near future, the state will do a lot to solve this problem. There are reasons for that. The state is preoccupied with the other problems, and when the state has to act, it has to act either through the police or child's authority or some official channels. And all these things means people who are willing to go out of the way to get these institutions work. That kind of public servant is becoming less and less. These are really jobs for good public servants. If they have a real interest, they can talk with so many sources and get things done. One of the unfortunate problems of what we discussed early in the beginning of this lecture about constitutional changes is that the quality of the public servant is deteriorated. The quality of public servant has got deteriorated for understandable reasons. The reason is, in the past, before these changes, before 72 and 78, every public servant had a lot of freedom to do what they want. Usually the person who will be in a particular subject is a person who has an interest in this subject. Let us say paddy cultivation. It will be a person who has some interest in that, and he learns that further by acting, and then he brings his knowledge to bear in the discussions and proposing various kinds of things to solve the problems. It happens in every field like that. Because the freedom was recognized. Freedom of the public servant to do what he thinks is right was recognized. If he does it wrong, then he will be warned or he will be corrected. Or if he's really going bad, he can be removed. But by and largest section of people don't do like that. When they are given the chance, they go out of their way to get that particular problem they are involved in resolved. One of the results of the 1978 Constitution was this kind of freedom was removed because for everything there was political interference. Either you have a interference from the very top or at the middle of the ladder or bottom of the ladder. Even a small councillor in a local government will begin to tell the public servant working there, this is how you do it. If the public servant becomes more popular because he is doing some good work, it will be treated with jealousy because the local politician wants to get the credit because he wants to get the votes next time. So everything is measured in terms of votes. And sometimes, you can't blame them because the system is created in that way. Your survival is about how many votes you can get, but not whether you solve the problem. Because the politicians cannot solve problems. Politicians can guide the solving of problems. Politicians can allocate funds for solving of problems. They can develop policies for solving of problems. But actual solving of problems on the ground level has to be through public servants and the citizens. It is a cooperation of the public servant with the citizen that is the daily life of a state. Whether it is the health sector, whether it is a sector of education, whether it is from primary areas of welfare for poorer children, or distribution of money for the poorer families for food, all this takes place through the medium of public servants. If the public servants feel that the first thing for their future, most important thing for their future is to win the political favor of politicians, their main interest will not become the people. They will just only do what the politician wants them to do, and in the process, that inner linkage between one human person who is a public servant, other human beings who are citizens will be lost. Societies are not run on the basis of regulations, rules, and political favors. They are run by the inner linkages of various people who hold authority and the people who are subjected to authority, who are supposed to cooperate with that authority. Now that is the unfortunate consequence of the kind of political system we established through 1970s. Now nobody wants to take the responsibility, because if anything goes wrong, he will be held, he will be condemned. So you get better credit by being politically loyal than being loyal to your job, loyal to your task, loyal to the people you serve. Now these are all the kind of problems that are affecting above all issue like child sex abuse. You may think that okay, we write some letters, we do a few things and this will go away. No, it will not go away. There was a lot of condemnation for last a few decades about child sex abuse. There were some extremely good people in the child authority who tried to do good work, and some of them were medical doctors, and they knew the problem, and they tried to intervene on the basis of their professional knowledge and try to do things, but they were not taken seriously. They were not helped to carry out what they designed. As a result, the problem is ever growing. As the Premalal case, you can take the case of child abuse as an example. I'm using only it as an example. You can apply that example to any other problem that is associated. And then you can ask yourself, why is that problem remaining unresolved? There are so many things that is easy to resolve, provided that there is a will, and the will means this kind of will which is not interfered by political considerations, fear or favor. Either try to get favor by not doing some things, or fear to do what they think correct without incurring some problems. So what all this is showing, and I could go also into other issues such as the whole issue of liberty and the human rights, the rule of law, which will be what we try to cover in the next one. All that depends on resolving this major problem. That is, there should not be room to make immoral laws. If the laws are immoral, then I don't have to go back on that. I said that in the beginning, that then everything comes to a conflict, and we are going towards a degeneration of a society. Degeneration will bring about its own very bad consequences. So that is what human rights is about. Human rights is not about knowing this or that and going and telling that to somebody else. Human rights is about human problem solving. Try to solve human problems. It's a gradual process. Some countries have achieved this. What we are talking about now will not happen in those countries. There may be, there will never be an occasion where somebody like Premalal Jayasekara could come to the parliament when he's convicted of this. Is unimaginable. They will not even, there will be a social upheaval. Even if they think about it, people will not even think about it. And that is why this incident received the highest media attention outside the world. Biggest news agencies, the Guardian in London, New York Times, all this, they carry it with surprise. What they were virtually saying is, look, in that country, when a murderer can sit in the parliament. Now, some societies have solved this problem. Child sex abuse can happen in any country, but it doesn't become an epidemic. It doesn't acquire the kind of proportion that we have. Some threats to women's security exist in every country, but the kind of restrictions, fears, or traveling in the when after the by the evening, stopping everything and or being accompanied by so many to go around. These things don't happen anymore. they move about the same way as the men do. So we are not talking about things that as some ideal situation where it is not possible to achieve things. These are things which have been achieved in many other countries, which we are lagging behind. And unfortunately, we are going to even lag behind more. So if you take these problems in that spirit and use this as a way of thinking, human rights as a way of thinking, critiquing, and participating, then the people will not treat human rights as a foreign idea. They will treat human rights as their idea because it is dealing with their problems. We will be sending this copy of this video to you so that you can, if you wish, you can share it with whomever you want. At the same time, you can also think over these problems. We will send few questions, and those who are interested could write short answers to these questions so that what we are discussing will take root in your mind. So we will follow it up in that way. And the next one, we will discuss the few items, which are first of all, the right of freedom and association and freedom of expression, and what is called the shrinking of the public space. It's a very important issue. And then the basic problems of rule of law in terms of a book which we have translated into Sinhalese also is available, Nitiya Mata Palane, which is rule of law by Tom Bingham, one of the most senior judges in Britain. So that is how we continue this discussion in the next week.